They thought they were moving into a dream home, a quiet neighborhood, friendly smiles, the perfect fresh start. But within days, those smiles turned into whispers, the welcome mats into warnings. Notes appeared on their door. Fines for things they never did. A flag they proudly raised was suddenly against regulations. And when they asked why, the truth cut deeper than any rule book. Because this wasn't about paint colors or mailbox heights. It was about who they were. What happens when patriotism meets prejudice behind the gates of perfect suburbia? Marcus Bell had never asked for much, just peace, stability, and a place where his family could finally breathe easy. After 2 tours overseas, he'd saved every dollar to buy a modest house in Crestwood Estates, a picture-perfect community with manicured lawns and neatly painted fences. To him, it felt like victory, a quiet reward for years of sacrifice. He and his wife planted a garden, hung an American flag beside the porch, and watched their little girl ride her bike down the cul-de-sac without worry. For the first time in years, the world felt calm. But soon, whispers began to creep through that calm. Neighbors who once waved now averted their eyes. The flag that symbolized his service became a silent controversy. Then came the first letter from the HOA, a vague complaint, professionally worded but pointed. Marcus couldn't shake the unease in his gut. He didn't know it yet, but that letter was the first crack in the illusion, the beginning of a quiet war he never saw coming. At first, Marcus thought it was a misunderstanding. The HOA's complaint cited unauthorized decorations, their American flag, and the small sign in the yard honoring veterans. He sent a polite email explaining his service, even including a photo from deployment. Days passed. Then came another notice. Violation unresolved. Fines accruing daily. Soon after, the lawn maintenance requests began, nitpicking details like the shade of mulch, the size of the mailbox numbers, even the way they parked their car. It was relentless, almost surgical in precision. While every other yard had variations and quirks, only his seemed to violate aesthetic standards. One evening, Marcus returned home from work to find his daughter's chalk drawings scrubbed off the sidewalk and a clipped note taped to their door. "This isn't appropriate for our community." No signature, just that perfect, sterile handwriting. He stared at it, the color draining from his face. His daughter's innocence had just been erased, literally. His wife, Jasmine, tried to stay calm, whispering, "Maybe it's just one person." But Marcus could feel eyes on them now. The way neighbors watched as they brought groceries in. The way conversations stopped when he walked by. The warmth that once greeted them had curdled into something brittle, sharp. And then came the meeting. He arrived at the HOA hall with documents, photographs, even the community bylaws. But as he stepped inside, the hush was immediate. A long table, folded arms, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. They let him speak, briefly, and then dismissed him with bureaucratic precision. "We'll review the matter," that was all. Yet the tone said everything. "You don't belong here." Weeks later, the fines tripled. Notices arrived almost daily. Marcus tried to fight through legal channels, but the cost was crushing. The same neighbors who once offered casseroles now filed complaints. Too much noise, untrimmed bushes, suspicious visitors. The isolation squeezed tighter. Nights grew quiet except for the sound of him pacing, a soldier again, scanning for an enemy he couldn't see but could feel everywhere. Then one morning, a letter came marked "Final Warning." They were to remove the flag within 48 hours or face property liens. He sat on the porch, the flag waving above him, heavy with both pride and defiance. The wind rippled through the fabric as if it were breathing with him. That night, someone spray-painted a word across his fence, an old slur, jagged and crude. Marcus didn't yell. He didn't even move. He just stared at it, the streetlight flickering overhead. For the first time in years, the battlefield wasn't somewhere far away. It was right here, in the neighborhood he fought to protect. And as dawn broke, one thought anchored in his mind. If they wanted to break him quietly, they picked the wrong man. The day of the final hearing arrived under a flat gray sky. Marcus wore his pressed uniform jacket, medals aligned perfectly, pride stitched into every seam. He wasn't going to hide who he was anymore. The HOA board sat in their usual line, calculating, cold, already convinced. Behind them, a few neighbors whispered, their eyes darting toward him like he was a headline waiting to happen. He laid out his case. Letters, timestamps, photos, all proof that the rules weren't applied equally. But with every word, he could feel the wall between them growing taller. Their expressions didn't change. Not even when he read the slur spray-painted on his own fence. One member shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. When the verdict came, it was swift and thinly veiled. The flag must come down, fines to be paid, or the house risked foreclosure. Something inside Marcus splintered. This wasn't about rules, it never had been. It was about erasing him. Erasing his service, his voice, his family's right to belong. He stood there, breath steady but heart roaring. Without a word, he turned and walked out of that sterile room, past the neighbors who looked away, past the security guard who avoided his gaze. At home, Jasmine met him at the door. The sun was setting, its light catching on the folds of the flag out front. The notice from the board fluttered against the porch rail, forgotten. Before he could speak, headlights rolled up the street, one, then another, then several more. People were gathering, but these weren't angry faces this time. Other veterans, families from nearby towns, news crews who had heard. Marcus looked up at that flag, his flag, and tightened his grip on the pole as the cameras clicked. The same symbol they tried to silence was now the light that drew others in. The quiet battle was no longer quiet, and somewhere deep down, he knew. The war had just changed battlefields. The story didn't end on that porch, but it began to change there. Within days, Marcus's story spread. Local reporters picked it up, then national outlets. Veterans organizations reached out. Lawyers offered to help. What had started as whispers of exclusion became a public reckoning for the neighborhood's board. Under pressure, the HOA rescinded their penalties. One by one, the signs of silence began to crumble. But the real victory wasn't the legal one, it was the human one. Neighbors who once stayed quiet stepped forward, ashamed of their silence. Some apologized. Others brought flags of their own, lining the street in an unplanned tribute. For the first time, Marcus felt seen, not as a problem, but as a man reclaiming his rightful place. Yet even as justice arrived, a heavier truth lingered. It shouldn't have taken cameras, headlines, or outrage to make people notice what was wrong. The system that punished Marcus wasn't built overnight, and it wouldn't disappear with one apology. It was the same foundation that told countless others they didn't belong, no matter how hard they served, how much they gave, or how fiercely they loved their country. Marcus still flies that flag, not as a sign of defiance, but of hope, that someday respect won't depend on skin color or on who dares to speak up. His story became a reminder that silence is also a choice, and courage, sometimes, is simply refusing to take something down. Because behind every rule, every regulation, every quiet act of hate disguised as policy, there's a person forced to carry its weight. And the question that lingers long after the headlines fade is this: if we see it happening again, will we turn away or finally stand beside them?